Specialist at GoldSilver.com. Alan, I may as well start there with the questions that Mike has for you. Where does gold go and what are its key risks in 2025?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm definitely expecting gold to have a great year in 2025, just like it did in 2024. I would not be surprised at all if it clears that $3,000 an ounce threshold, and it could be the last year to buy gold under $3,000 an ounce. So in terms of the risk, what would prevent it from doing that? There's really two things that I see. One is actually Bitcoin. If capital is attracted to Bitcoin instead of gold, gold might not creep that high. And the other risk factor, which really isn't a risk factor, it's actually peace. It's world peace. If all the wars and conflicts in the world settle down and our leaders are actually able to negotiate peace, capital might not flow into gold like it has been throughout the last couple of years. So those are the two risks that I see. It's really gold, is Bitcoin and peace.
All right, so then for the run-up that we've seen in 2024, Alan, is it because of the geopolitical concerns mostly, which we know gold has historically been a safe haven, but is that the reason why we've seen such the run-up in your view?
I think that's sort of the main underlying factor because it's that geopolitical uncertainty that causes so many other things. So we saw China buying a ton of gold. Not only is China the #1 producer of gold in the world, it's also the #1 importer of gold in the world, and that's very unusual. And investors around the world are also buying gold because of inflation, and the inflation is caused by all these countries who are fighting wars running their printing presses. So if it weren't for the wars, they wouldn't be running the printing presses so heavily. Investors wouldn't be worried about inflation, and they wouldn't be running to gold. So I think it really starts with all the geopolitical uncertainty. If we could all get along, we wouldn't have to buy gold. We could just live our lives.
Well, Alan, you heard Mike McLeod there. We were speaking a little bit about crypto, and he maintains that this idea of a strategic reserve is a Faustian bargain with the crypto people and the incoming president and the administration. Is that true in your view?
Well, I think Bitcoin is best thought of as superior money. And any time that two different monies come up against each other, the same thing happens every single time throughout history. Capital flows from the weak money into the strong money, and it's only a matter of time. So if you look at the United States and you want to discuss the strategic national Bitcoin reserve, is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Is it going to happen within the first 100 days, or is it not even going to happen in the next 4 years? All of that doesn't really matter. Capital is definitely going to flow from weak money, like the US dollar, into strong money, like Bitcoin. It's just a matter of time.
I think you need to back that up a little bit. Why do you say Bitcoin is superior money? It's not even money.
No offense, I have yet to transact in Bitcoin, and I think if you ask most people, unless you go to an emerging area, have yet to transact in Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked, and I could talk about it for hours, but I'll try to keep my answer short. There's really two ways to think about money. First is as a medium of exchange, which I would actually call a currency. So if you're going to buy a cup of coffee or groceries, you're going to use currency, and you want something that moves quickly, it has low transaction fees, and doesn't take a lot of energy to make that transaction. And the US dollar is great for that. The other reason you'd have money is as a store of value. And that basically means you acquire it, and then you hold it for 10 years or 20 years, and it just sits there, and you might even forget that you have it. But the whole point is for it to stay in one place and secure your value over time. That's gold, and it's Bitcoin. So that when I say money, I'm referring to gold or Bitcoin, that store of value functionality, whereas a currency like the US dollar, that's more of a medium of exchange. So by the way, don't hold your breath on being able to use Bitcoin to buy a cup of coffee. It's not going to happen. It shouldn't happen.
Sure.
It doesn't matter.
Why are you so convinced it's a store of value? Because the supply is finite? Does that make it a store of value necessarily?
It's partly because the supply is finite, but more importantly, it gets increasingly more difficult to make another Bitcoin. That's so critical. That happens naturally with gold. No one has to design it that way. But if there's 2 different ounces of gold sitting in the ground, and one's really easy to get to and one's really hard to get to, you're going to mine up the easy one. So later in the future, you're going to have to go after that hard one and spend more energy to get a unit of gold in the future. Bitcoin mimics that same property artificially using code so that it takes more and more and more energy to mine each subsequent Bitcoin. That's good news for anyone holding Bitcoin, because if you acquired it earlier, it didn't take you that much energy to get it. However, anyone who wants to acquire a Bitcoin in the future has to give up a lot of energy to get one.
I guess, Alan, I would ask that if there's a limited supply, I understand the dynamics of supply and demand, but if there's a limited supply, how can it be something that is used much more broadly? I understand the value of maybe blockchain in terms of transacting, but the individual Bitcoin as a way of transacting, if it's going to be limited in supply forever, how can it be something that's much more broadly in use in terms of how we look at the US dollar or other currencies?
Yeah, well, it sort of relates to my previous answer, which is that I wouldn't expect Bitcoin to be used in day-to-day transactions. Even if you develop something like the Lightning Network or other layer 2 solutions, they're called, I don't think it'll be that common to actually transact Bitcoin. It will be more common to transact US dollars, euros, yen, and so forth, whatever jurisdiction
But
you're
Alan,
in.
didn't people say that about NFTs too? And they're not worth very much these days, are they?
I would not go anywhere near NFTs. No,
Yeah.
I only go near Bitcoin. I made a mistake going after a dozen other cryptos when I thought they had attractive use cases, but they're very hard to value and they have real idiosyncratic risks. So I even went so far as to go visit one of these cryptocurrencies in person. I looked at their code, I met the team, I did my due diligence, and I lost 99.9% of my value on that coin. And I have multiple stories like that. Most of these cryptocurrencies, they're not, well, some are designed to be scams. They're not all designed to be scams, but some of them turn out to be scams because they have so many idiosyncratic risks. You have to have execution on the part of the software team. You have to have marketing. You have to have adoption. You have to have functionality. You can't have problems. And you can't really have competitors that accomplish the same thing better than the way you accomplished it, or you're not going to attract capital. So,
But Alan, if
most
you say
cryptocurrencies
Bitcoin
out
is
there-
still in the process of price discovery, how do you discover, a price when it's very unclear what the fundamentals are?
Yeah, I mean, right, its value is
I mean,
in
is it
that
worth
it's
100,000?
outside the establishment, and yet that lack of transparency raises so many questions.
Well, Bitcoin is transparent. I mean, it's a public blockchain, right? So you can go and look online and see where all the blockchains are sitting, what the history of them has been, in what block they were mined. You can see all of that. So transparency is actually pretty fantastic on Bitcoin. However, if I want to see how many dollars exist, I have to trust the Federal Reserve's data, and I don't. And it could be, outdated, and I don't know who's holding those dollars or where they are.
But I have
or
the
how
faith of the
concentrated
U.S.
they are.
government, and I know some could debate that right now, but nonetheless, you have the faith of the U.S. government. Listen, this excitement, we know we could go on for probably another hour, means this is going to be a hot topic in 2025. Alan, thank you so much. Have a great new year. Alan Hibbard, precious metals and alternative money specialist over at GoldSilver.com. Hey, folks, we're